And so I was wondering how your relationship with hope during this protracted, awful, scary illness was versus your sense of hope afterwards. What was the journey you went on with that emotion?
I mean, one thing to consider is the fact that Pat was the most hopeful person I think I've ever met. Incredibly optimistic, and had this incredible ability to hone in on that and focus on it in the most trying and horrendous of circumstances where, you know, we just didn't know what was going to happen next. And, you know, over the course of those 6 years, you know, we had a lot of consultants' appointments where it was, you know, said that he didn't have long to live, and then something would happen, and we would be given a little bit of hope that there might be a new medication that he could take, or okay, there's a different kind of surgery we can do, which kind of bought us time, but it never solved the problem that there was this inoperable section of tumor that it just could not be removed, and it would morph at some point. So I think over the 6 years that we dealt with this condition, I witnessed that, and I saw him deal with his illness in an extraordinary way. That when he died, it was almost paying tribute to him to try and hold on to that, to harness his hope when I didn't have any. I would think back to moments that seemed so dark, where he seemed to be able to do that. And I tried to copy him. And so at the beginning, it was copycat. It was copying him. And then slowly, as I was sort of finding my balance in myself, and actually trying to wrestle with who I was without him, I managed to find my own hope within myself. And that's been the transition, which can sometimes be quite painful because it feels like you're slightly moving away from that person as time goes by. But in the beginning of the book, I mention hope within the first few pages, and I mention Emily Dickinson. I mean, I mention a lot of authors and writers and poets and thinkers in the book because it's important to get lots of different experiences and pack it in. But Emily Dickinson has written a lot of poetry on hope, and there's the famous poetry line is when she says hope is a thing with feathers, which I'm sure a lot of you have read, which gives a very naturalistic and instinctive, you know, idea of what that can be for us. But what I picked up on was another poem that she wrote where she actually called hope a strange invention, and it was the idea of the duality of hope is that on some days it can feel very natural, it can come to us in a very naturalistic way. Other times it feels like you're having to really search for it or force it. It feels unnatural. And I think this idea of hope being a strange invention in those early days of grief was how I felt about it, that it didn't feel like it was there for me to just find and utilize. I had to find it myself, and at times it felt like I was swimming against the current in order to do so. But I think it is a very multifaceted thing, hope. When we can sit here and I can talk about, you know, how that has evolved with me, especially over the last 5 years. It's not always there, and even now, I still have a lot of anger. I would say mainly about, in terms of what I've seen. We bear witness, don't we? If we've cared for somebody and seen them die, we are very passively borne witness to something that we couldn't change or alter. Ultimately, we could help as much as we can to be there for that person. But ultimately, we can't change what happens next. And I think that's what I struggled with at the time. And, you know, on the days where I struggle with hope now and feel a little bit angry, it's how much he did suffer in those last few weeks, and how little I could do to affect change at that time, other than to comfort him and to make sure that he died as peacefully as was possible. So it's an ever evolving thing, I would say, and it's not always easy to grasp, and sometimes you have to mold it and shape it yourself, and that can feel quite tiring sometimes, I would say.